You always know how to make me laugh.
I'm glad I do.
You look beautiful tonight.
I never expected my life to collapse on an ordinary evening. There was no warning, no dramatic buildup, just a single moment that split my entire existence into a clear before and after. I had gone out that night because a friend insisted I needed some fresh air. He said I was getting too comfortable in my routine, that I needed to get out of the house. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't looking for answers. I certainly wasn't prepared to find my wife. The bar was crowded and loud, the kind of place people go to forget their responsibilities, to lose themselves in the noise. I pushed through the room, feeling a bit out of place, and that's when I saw her. I heard her laugh first, a sound that I hadn't heard directed at me in months. It was carefree, vibrant. Then I saw her body pressed against someone else, her hands where they had no right to be. Time seemed to slow down. The loud music faded into a dull throb in my ears. My chest tightened, and it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. It was a visceral, physical reaction. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell or make a scene. A part of me just broke. I simply turned around and walked out, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever we had built, was already dead. When she came home later that night, drunk and careless, I told her I knew. Her initial reaction was to minimize it. She said it was nothing, just a silly mistake. When that didn't work, she tried to blame her boredom, saying our life had become too predictable. Finally, she turned it on me, accusing me of being distant and emotionally unavailable. But none of it mattered. The damage was done. By morning, my decision was made. Trust, once it's broken like that, doesn't heal. It doesn't get a cast and slowly mend. It rots from the inside out. The divorce was quiet and fast. We didn't have children. We didn't have a shared business. It was just a cold process of papers and signatures, the final administrative act of dismantling a life. My friends told me I was being so strong, so stoic, but I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. I felt like a house that had been completely emptied, with nothing left but the echo of what used to be there. I threw myself into work, filling my days with tasks and my nights with pure exhaustion. I convinced myself that the silence in my apartment was peace. For a while, it worked. Months passed. Slowly, the sharp edges of the pain started to dull. It became more of a constant, low-level ache instead of a searing wound. I stopped checking my phone out of habit, that nervous tick of seeing if she had called or texted. I rearranged the furniture in the apartment, trying to erase the ghost of our shared life. I didn't want it to feel like a museum of failed memories anymore. I told myself I was moving on. I was convincing myself I was okay. Then, late one night, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it. Nothing good ever comes from a late-night call from a number you don't recognize. But something, some gut feeling, made me answer. Her voice was different. It wasn't defensive like it was that night. It wasn't dramatic or pleading. It was just tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her. She wasn't calling for that. She said she was calling because she had no one else. Life, she explained, hadn't unfolded the way she'd imagined. The excitement she had chased, that new spark she thought she'd found, had burned out quickly. It left nothing but ashes and a sense of emptiness. She was adrift, and she was scared. My immediate reaction was to hang up. I wanted to protect the fragile stability I had so carefully rebuilt for myself. I didn't want to get pulled back into her chaos. But despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, a part of me still recognized the woman I once loved, buried underneath all the mistakes. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral, public place, a quiet coffee shop in the middle of the afternoon. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, older. The confidence that she once wore like armor was completely gone. She sat across from me, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. She didn't even touch the coffee she ordered. She told me about the choices she'd made after the divorce, how each wrong decision seemed to lead to another, each one easier to make than the last. It was a domino effect of bad judgment and short-term thinking. She wasn't making excuses. She was just laying out the facts of her downfall. She didn't ask to come back. She didn't ask for money, she just asked for help. I looked at her, and the anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a strange, sad clarity. I told her I wasn't her savior. I couldn't fix her life for her. She just nodded, her eyes downcast. She said she knew. And that really should have been the end of it. I could have walked away then, my conscience clear. I had listened. I had shown a basic level of human decency, but it wasn't the end. Over the following weeks, I found myself getting involved in her recovery in ways I never planned. Not as a husband, not as a boyfriend or a rescuer, but simply as a person who could unstand by and watch another human being fall completely apart if there was a chance to stop it. I helped her find professional support, therapists, and support groups. I drove her to some of her first appointments because she was too anxious to go alone. I kept firm, clear boundaries even when nostalgia and old feelings tried to blur them. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger resurfaced, hot and sharp. Moments when the old wounds reopened and I remembered exactly why my life had fallen apart. There were moments when I seriously questioned my own sanity for allowing her back into my orbit, even in this limited way. But something else happened too. I found a new kind of clarity. We were no longer bound by the expectations of a relationship, no longer hiding behind illusions. The truth stood between us, raw and undeniable. This wasn't about us getting back together. This was about two separate people dealing with the fallout of a shared past. Eventually, slowly, she started to stand on her own 2 feet again. She got a steady job. She started rebuilding her life, not based on chasing excitement, but on building something real and stable for herself. One day she apologized. Properly, this time, there were no excuses. There were no dramatic tears. It was just quiet, direct accountability. She owned her actions and the pain she had caused. And I accepted it. Not because it magically erased the past, but because I realized that carrying around all that resentment had started to feel heavier than the act of letting it go. It was a burden I no longer wanted to carry. We didn't reconcile. We didn't try to rewrite history. We went our separate ways, but this time we both left with something neither of us had before: genuine honesty. We had faced the ugliest parts of our story and survived it. Today my life is steady.